Hello and welcome to Salem Voices. I'm Lucy Rose, your host, and today I'm really excited to introduce a real friend of mine. We were at Salem at the same time, Ann Stokley from the Salem College class of 1977. Ann's joined us today from her home on the North Carolina coast. Yes, I am jealous. Ann, welcome. I'm so glad to have you.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Yeah, real pleasure. It's cold here, so I hope it's better for you. But anyway, I really can't wait to hear your story. What an incredible story it is. From earning a BS degree in biology at Salem, to earning a master's of science degree in public health from Chapel Hill, to leading significant projects and teams in the pharmaceutical industry with Glaxo. And I say Glaxo instead of GlaxoSmithKline because you did it through several mergers and name changes, I think, often resulting, frankly, in new drug approvals, which made our world a safer and better place. But I just have to say what an impact you've made in your life journey. And so we're thrilled to have you. So I just want you to fill us in 5 minutes or less. How'd you get from being a Salem senior to where you are today, retired at the beach? And kind of what have you done along the way, just big picture to get us going?
Okay. So BS in biology from Salem is a fantastic starting point, but it probably gives you some opportunity for a job, but I knew I needed an advanced degree. So Steve Nolgren, who was one of the professors in the biology department, went to my program, the Master's of Science in Public Health at UNC, and he kind of said, hey, I think this fits what you're looking for, which was laboratory management and a more public health, broader focus. Okay. So I went to UNC, finished my degree, started working in the clinical virology lab at UNC hospitals. Now, everybody knows about virology right now because of COVID, but back then and still today, virology laboratories are not common. There aren't many good drugs for viral infections, and so your doctor usually just tells you it's probably a virus.
I heard that before. Yeah.
So fortuitously, our lab contracted with Burroughs Wellcome, who was developing the first drug for HIV infections at the time. So we were doing the clinical laboratory work. So that was my first real exposure, like, aha, this is what drug development looks like. This is what happens when people have no therapies and all of a sudden you're developing something that will absolutely change a disease. So I realized at that point, I was curious about the patients. I was curious about what the drug was doing. I just had more questions than answers, and our lab results were a little piece of that puzzle. So I started exploring job openings at Burroughs Wellcome at the time, which was the only pharma company in North Carolina.
Wow.
I got turned down, but then Glaxo, which was a British company, wanted to have a US presence. And so they started hiring locally and were developing antibiotics. And so my microbiology background fit perfectly with that. And they had ambitions to do antivirals. So I got a job. Was the 50th person hired in US R&D at Glaxo. So little tiny company where everybody did everything, not like the global company that I left in 2016. So from there, I went into clinical research where we did the clinical trials of antibiotics. So my job was a monitor. I went out to study sites, talked to the people treating the patients, learned about the patient experiences, got the data, brought it back to the company. Worked on my first new drug application, which is your application to FDA for a drug approval. Then I saw, again, a bigger picture. So I had just done the clinical part of this, and I saw the toxicology, I saw the manufacturing, I learned about the marketing aspects, trade names, slogans, all kinds of interesting interactions that a company has with FDA when a new drug's getting ready to be launched. So that kind of made me look at the regulatory role that I had for many, many years. So I got new antibiotics approved. I got new drugs for HIV approved. And then I took even a bigger step. Then our US regulatory department was being merged into a global regulatory department in the company. So international, European, and US regulatory became one big global group. And I was asked to be a change agent for that, to work on the transformation team, which really, again, huge expansion of my knowledge. I kind of knew what the European approvals looked like. I didn't know much about international, I have to admit. And so, again, you just get into this bigger broader scope of how your company makes an impact in the world with new products. So it was a huge learning curve there. And at the end, I ended up on a quality and governance team and role, again, working in regulatory across not only pharma, which is where I was, drugs, but vaccines and the consumer products. So I've taken incremental steps every time, and it's just expanded my horizons, challenged me, and I feel like my contributions grew and grew.
Wow, what a life.
It was. It was a great career.
What an impact in a career you made. I'd love to just kind of break it down a bit and just go bit by bit, just a little, so that folks can understand a little bit better what that impact is and some of your learnings, which I just think are so important as we think about leadership and we think about where we're all going. And especially as Salem makes that transition to a transformation of health leadership for women. What does that look like? Because you're kind of the epitome of a role model, I think, as you've kind of worked your way along the way. So let's just start right at the beginning there with your clinical research of antibiotics and treatments for HIV that you were working on. Tell us a little bit about it. And it wasn't exactly a direct path clearly from your master's degree, as you just said a minute ago, but what did you do in that role and what did you learn from that that actually then took you to that next step?
So the good part about drug development in anti-infectives is it's quick. So the product either cures you or doesn't. It's not a long-term like drop blood pressure or make you feel better if it's an antidepressive. The studies are fast and furious. So we study drugs in 7 days, 10 days. For HIV, you are on therapy for a long time, but you get immediate results. Your drug impacts the germ in the body and kills it. So that was a great thing to be in because you don't get tired. You work on lots of projects because things move through pretty quickly. So a new antibiotic, when I started back in the day, might take 3 to 5 years to get approved. Today, there are very different review pathways at FDA, and so it's a matter of months, less than a year, when a new product comes out. But it kept it interesting. It kept it, dealing with the people in the clinics was fascinating. I met study nurses. I met infectious disease doctors. We went to conferences. You just learn a lot about a world that you know some about. I was a really healthy child. I didn't take any medicine growing up, and I still don't. So I learned a lot about actually people who take a lot of medicine, drug interactions, things like that, that just I wasn't aware of. So it's a great start with a solid background in microbiology. So I knew the names of the bugs. I knew that, how it impacted the parts of the body. So I knew that half of it. I just didn't know the therapy side.
It's interesting, that you're talking about it doesn't take too long at FDA anymore, or the time frames have been cut because of different pathways that have been introduced. But just for folks who may never have thought about drug development and how long it really takes and what's really involved, quick little detour. From start to finish, even taking anti-infective, which might be one of the quickest ones because the studies are also shorter because they don't have to be on the product longer and it's easier to get enrolled patients and things like that. But just to give feel of folks of how challenging it is and how long it may take to actually get a product approved. Can you give a little bit of a normal time frame? That's not a year or less. It's a long time.
No. Yeah. So there are 3 stages of pharmaceuticals. So the first is basic research in a laboratory with test tubes. Does product A actually kill a bacteria, or does it impact a disease? It's now done a lot with computer modeling. So there's not so much pouring things from test tube A to test tube B. So you want to treat a disease and you're looking for a molecule that makes an impact against for an anti-infective, that bacteria or that virus. Years and years. This is not quick and easy. Many thousands of failures. The computer modeling helps so much because you can do tens of thousands of trials from a molecular standpoint to see if there is any way you can get into that bacterial cell wall and destroy the bacteria with your compound. But that's early on. That's invisible to all patients and all consumers. years and years and years of trial, error. Then all of a sudden you get the magic molecule that looks like it's going to work. There's still toxicology studies and drug metabolism studies in animals. So that's the guinea pig phase, which a lot of people know that, but it's usually in mice. Primates have gone out of use, occasionally dogs, but it just depends on what the disease is and how you can model it well. Then the very first trials are phase 1, which is a pure safety. You have a theory that the molecule works in humans, but this first trial is to just show in a healthy subject that the drug causes no harm. That usually takes 6 to 8 months to run those studies. They used to recruit college kids a lot for that because they paid them. I'm not sure that's so true anymore. But then you get into phase 2, which is a dose finding study. So you might have a range of doses. You don't want to be toxic, which is a high dose. You don't want to be ineffective, which is too low a dose. So usually 3 doses are put into a dose ranging trial to test to see in a patient which one works the best. That again can take up to a year to get a dose after you do that first 6 months. And then you go into phase 3, which a lot of us have heard about for the vaccine studies lately, where you go into a broad population and you need to collect lots of numbers because you're looking for small effects, for bad effects, side effects, as well as major ones. So you ruled out the major ones in your healthy volunteer studies and some in your phase 2. But in phase 3, you want to see in the general population, tall people, short people, fat people, skinny people, how's your drug going to perform? How long do you have to take it to maximize the effect? Do you have to repeat it? What kind of follow-up do you have to do? Like for bacterial studies, maybe there's a second follow-up to make sure you're clear of the organism. In the hospital, that's always done. As an outpatient, that's rarely done. Again, this involves tens of thousands of patients and takes 3 to 4 years to complete. So before anything goes into FDA for that now 1-year review, there's 5 to 7 years of work in the background.
I just thought that would be fun for people to understand and to really have a little bit of a background about how much goes into this. And that leads us directly, you mentioned the COVID vaccine. Clearly, all of us are kind of in the middle of that right now and scheduling ourselves to take it and trying to find a place to get it. You had yours already. If I remember right, you were part of one of the trials. So is it important to get it? Tell us about that. And would you say everybody needs to get that and it's safe? And how do you know?
So it is very important that everybody gets it. And I'm so glad there is so much enthusiasm, demand now. I was a little worried that people would have reservations, but in the Moderna and the Pfizer trials, which are the only 2 approved in the US for use right now, there have been almost 100,000 volunteers. That's a lot of people like me who put their arm out, and we either got the active vaccine or the placebo. It's 50-50 chance you would get the real thing. 2 doses, just like is being administered today. So we, as a trial volunteer, are monitored every week for ill effects. We have an app on our phone. We get a reminder at 6 o'clock on Tuesday night. I get my reminder to log in. I go through the checklist of all the side effects that they're watching for. And then, of course, there's a fill in the blank, anything else. And I submit that. So for 2 years, I will be monitored every week. And then our blood's drawn to show the antibodies and how high the antibody level is in our bodies and how long it lasts. So I've had my first blood draw at a month after my second dose. My 6-month blood draw is March, and then I have 2 more to finish by 2 years from last September.
Oh,
and it's in a very intensive study program. All of us are extremely healthy. There has only been 1 person with significant COVID disease who got the actual vaccine in the total of the Moderna and the Pfizer studies. I just read that today. That is unbelievable. 1 failure.
Well, it is. You would know because you've been involved in drug development, and we're going to talk about your time in regulatory affairs and what that is. But you've been involved in drug development your entire career. So to see something like this where they've only seen 1 significant thing this long in, when did you have yours? And the study started Oh,
My
wow.
study started in July. I got my first dose the 1st of September.
Okay. So we're talking already 4 months for you.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
they're already following, and longer than that when you look at the whole data. You're kind of like the canary in the mine for all of us because you're just ahead of us. That's really, really cool. So your message to folks is it's comfortable, it's safe. We all need to take it, it sounds like.
It's safe. I think people are worried about shortcuts. No shortcuts have been taken in these development programs. This is just like a traditional vaccine would have been developed. Phase one, phase two, phase three. None of that has been skipped. There's no guessing on the dose or what makes it work. The thing that has been shortened in this amazing 10-month timeline for vaccines is the manufacturing side. So both of these that are available now have to be frozen. That's not typical. If you go get a vaccination at CVS or Walgreens, they're pulling it out of the shelf. So the optimization of the product for sale is what has been not short taken, but they've taken the best they had at the time that they knew was safe and worked, even though it had to be kept frozen, and said, yeah, we're going to roll this out. A pharmaceutical company in normal times would not market a product like this. It's too costly. It causes a lot of supply challenges to keep those deep freezers, to watch the timing once you thaw. So in a year from now, I think both the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines will look very different. They'll probably be stored in a fridge, just like any other
I see.
vaccine for human use. So don't worry, there's no shortcut. That I had no reservation getting into this stuff.
Well, and I think you really speak from experience because your last role clearly oversaw a lot of this kind of quality expectation and
Right.
compliance expectation with the manufacturing and all of that as well. And so I think it's important. Last question about this, and then I want to move on more to about your leadership and the change agent piece of you. But the FDA, no shortcuts on their part in terms of reviewing this data either, and in terms of getting the blessing from the government in terms of the data from an objective standpoint in your mind?
No. So FDA now with modern ways to get data to FDA, everything's electronic. The pharmaceutical companies give FDA every piece of data electronically. FDA makes their own decisions about the conclusions that the pharmaceutical company has made. So they can challenge what we have been proposing for dosing, for strength, for appearance. There's a lot of nuances with FDA. They're going to put the safest, most effective product out on the market. That's their job. So no shortcuts have been taken. I mean, we all kind of heard there was a little bit of pressure. Surely you can just review this in a day. It can't be done. I mean, if you have thousands and thousands of patient data, you can't look at that overnight. And it's not one guy with his laptop doing it. So there's a lot of moving parts at FDA too that have to come together. At the end of the day, we saw the advisory committees where they get advice from very neutral scientists about their conclusions, and then they make the decision to approve. So it was done as fast as legally possible, but it was within every boundary of the law and the regulations.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for taking the time to educate all of us about all of this. And that, I get to where you have the expertise to be able to do this. You transition from the role we just talked about a minute ago to regulatory affairs. You actually had three distinct careers kind of within the same company, which is also fascinating. That's not the norm for a lot of people, and especially in today's world. Folks change companies to change
Oh,
careers.
yeah.
You
Yeah.
didn't have to really.
I
Your
didn't.
second
I got to stay in the same place I love to live for all that time. Yeah.
and still grow, which
Yes.
is really fun and try different things and experiment. But your next kind of semi-career was really in regulatory affairs, and that's where I think you spent the bulk of your career, if I
Yes.
remember correctly. First, what's regulatory affairs? Obviously, you take the data from clinical trials, submit them to FDA, work all of that up. You're the person who speaks with FDA often, all of that. But give folks, when I say regulatory affairs, what does that mean to you? You're the boss. What's it?
So the drug industry is one of the most regulated industries in the world. There are guidelines, there are regulations, there are laws. There are all different levels of compliance and conformance with these things. FDA publishes them. They're available to anybody. You can see what they are. So the regulatory affairs person has to interpret the FDA regulations into a practical set of instructions for the company. So we have to know what the toxicology regulations look like, what the drug metabolism regulations look like, what the clinical trials regulate, a little bit about everything. We're not the expert, but we're the resource to find the information. So you have to make sure that your company is following the regulations as you go through project team meetings and months and years of development. You don't want somebody to just be rogue and go offline because it'll come to haunt you, because you have to follow prescribed protocols and things that have been agreed by FDA. So there's a lot of collaboration at the beginning. We give proposals to FDA that do conform with their regulations, but maybe we want to do something a little bit faster or a little bit newer than the regulations reflect. So there's a lot of scientific discussion. There's a lot of, maybe you could do that if you show us this also. So there's a lot of negotiation about a drug development program, but that's the main role of the regulatory person at the beginning, is to negotiate that package, that framework for developing a drug that the FDA and the company have agreement on. Things happen, you kind of have to renegotiate things, you get surprised, you get disappointed, but then when you negotiate an approval, it's the same thing. You have to prove, we've done everything we've talked about for 5 years about this program, and here's why the results we have come up with are what we want you to approve. So again, at that point, you're the chief negotiator for the company. You have to bring in the technical experts to have the discussion with FDA's experts, but you're the liaison that makes the dialogue happen.
Wow. And at the same time, you're kind of serving two different groups. You have to please FDA and please your own internal folks, which is not easy. So what leadership lessons did you learn in that role that you then applied, obviously, to your next significant role as a change agent within the company?
Number one, you have to know what you're talking about. So you can't just say the toxicology regs say you need to do 6-week studies. You have to know why they decided on that and why your company's shortchanging it is not going to get you there. So there's a lot of finesse. Leadership is a lot of taking people along with you. That's what leading is. So you have to convince people that FDA is not the enemy, which I think a lot of folks, they can't make us do this. That you can't come in with that kind of attitude, because yes, they can, because they're the law. So I think it's that sort of bringing people along to help them understand the premise behind the request. It's not unreasonable. There's a lot of precedent in drug development. So if you know that Merck was asked to do the same thing, that's a job of the regulatory person to kind of know the landscape you're working in. Then you can convince your team or your experts that they're not being put upon. There's a real reason for this, and everyone is expected to do this, not just picking on us. So it is bringing your team up to believing that the FDA is a good advisor, and actually as a partner here. FDA wants good new products out as much as the pharma industry does.
Having served that for many years myself, I can absolutely say that is for sure a fact. Yeah. FDA does want that as well, and that in fact is part of their mission in your agency. So it is interesting to think about folks like you who kind of bridge that gap between what a company presents and what all of us want and need in order to do it right. So as you did that, though, I think about the challenges of being a change agent. What would you say you learned from the experiences of being one, and were, the biggest lessons you would take away if I were to say to you, and you're now mentoring somebody who's going to be leading a giant change, a big transformation for their company. What are the 3 most salient points that you think they should know in order to be successful about how to lead change? What would they be? And you don't have to name 3. I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Okay. So number one is you do have to do your homework. You have to understand what the job or the activity is today. You have to understand what these people are doing before you try and say, and we're going to change it for you. Because you have to understand where they're coming from. So that's an investment in leadership time. So sit with people, to talk with them, to talk with their managers, understand the challenges or the reluctance to change. You have to understand what your people are going to go through.
Yeah.
The second thing is you have to understand and believe that the improvement, the change is real and it's needed, or else you're not going to convince anybody to do it. So if the answer is we are going to save money, that's really not how you want to say that. You want to talk about efficiency. You want to talk about less wear and tear. You want to talk about opening up people for better opportunities because they won't do a task that's boring and repetitive because you've got a better way to do that. You have to kind of explain, and this will help you change yourself and grow into your career. So I think both of those, getting that knowledge on the ground of what the job is, and number two, to have a story on why the change is going to be better. It's not going to be better for everybody, unfortunately. Sometimes people lose their jobs. Sometimes functions go away completely. It's just an antique way of doing business. But the reality is most change is to make an improvement.
Well, we hope so.
Yes.
Deliberate is that direction.
Yes. Right.
And I think of two things when you said that. One is kind of the old marketing adage, what's in it for me, and it's translating that in why is this important not only to the company, but to you as a person?
Right.
And you said that about growth and your own development as a professional. And then I'm also led that whole concept of the why. For anybody who's now curious about the importance of the why, I think of, and I'm sure you do too, Simon Sinek, and the most watched TED Talk ever given was on the importance of the why. Because if we really do, the first thing we asked our parents, right, when they said you couldn't do something was,
why not?
Why not?
Yeah.
I mean, your daughter probably never asked you that, but
no, never.
Mine did, And so as we think about making those, because I also think as you went through this, you went through several mergers. So you went through culture
Absolutely.
change as well. And
Yeah.
How did you apply these learnings? What did you learn from culture change? And what were kind of some of the most effective mechanisms to help create a new successful culture that you may have found?
So again, I think you need to understand for the culture side, how people act, how they behave. At Glaxo, the meeting was the meeting. Everything was discussed in the meeting, and you made the decision and you left and did the work. At SmithKline, which was our second merger, there were pre-meetings before the meeting. But if you didn't know that, you were blindsided in the meeting because they came with the decision in their hand.
Yeah.
So it took a couple of failed meetings to know, wow, they're talking in the halls and we're not. So we got to get our hall talk done before we show up too. So you do have to understand how people operate, and they've been trained to operate that way. It's not malicious. That's just the way their company worked. But you have to understand that before you do a big change program, you're going to have to know where everybody's coming from, because they're not going to embrace the change if you just say, we're going to do it the Glaxo way. That's never the message to do. And usually when you change a process or you change a procedure, you're going to try and get the best of all the pieces. So somebody should have a little bit of stake in the change because you can recognize your piece wasn't lost. Sometimes, unfortunately, that's not true. But most of the time, you can recognize the value of your work in the new change program.
I think about you and how successful you have been as a leader. And I wonder, I'm looking back now and reflecting on our time at Salem together, since we were there at the same time, which is really cool to actually see what you've done with your career. We both had the same major, even.
Both of us, yeah.
Yeah, and both had Steve Nolgren, to give him a shout out again. But as we think about that, what would you say, Ann, from our time there, that how does Salem prepare you to lead? What about that experience help prepare you to end up being the woman leader that you are?
So I think single-sex education is sadly dying, but it was a huge advantage to me, as it is, I think, for most people that come out of Salem, because you're not competing with male counterparts who oftentimes speak up, stand up, make decisions faster than women are inclined to do. So when you don't have that natural pushback, your professor is looking at the 6 of you in 8 a.m. organic chemistry, and one of you is going to have to give the answer, and it's a girl. So, I just think by blocking out the males, because now there are male students at Salem, but there certainly were few and far between day students when we were there. It just gives you that, yes, women are expected to lead the class, to take the senior role, to mentor other people, because there's really no other alternative. We certainly had a lot of male professors. It wasn't like we, were in ancient Salem where you probably did have a female leader and a female class, but it just gave you the expectation that as a woman, you're going to step up. That's a powerful message.
A very powerful message. And I want to take that to health leadership again, as to kind of our transformation here. As you know, women are highly represented in health care and in the roles that are involved in health care, but highly underrepresented at the senior level of leadership in health when we define it more broadly. In fact, only about 25% of those roles are filled by women. From your perspective, how important is it for women to rise to those senior levels, and why do you think it's important? And are we making progress? What have we got to do to kind of make this work?
I think we are making progress. It's slow, and it's sometimes painful to watch it happen. Just like anything, I think a lot of leadership teams now are imposing quotas for boards, for senior levels in corporations, that more women need to be at the table along with minorities and people of color. So it's sad it takes that, but at the same time, we should take advantage of it. I think women, unfortunately, have multitasked their entire lives, either with parents, with children, with their own activities. They run the house. They are the amateur doctor in the house. We wear a lot of hats. You can do that at work too. And I think importantly, that's being recognized, that we don't dwell on things. We move from one thing to the next. We make pretty fast decisions. So a lot of stereotypes about women following the leader have been shattered, because we're very good at doing a lot of things at one time and doing them well.
So that's one thing I bring differently to the table, perhaps, is that ability to multitask in that way. Why would you say it's important? What are other reasons you think perhaps it's important that a higher percent, that more women voices are heard at that highest level?
Number one, you have to lead by example. So if there is a woman at that table, the younger staff know that they can sit at that table. It's very important. And you have to convince men who follow your lead that you're the right person for the job. So it's double pronged. There's a lot of pressure on women to perform well. There's all the comparisons about, emotions in the workplace, and, being stoic and things like that. If that's not your nature, you really can't force yourself to be that way. So you don't want women that act like men. You want women leaders that act like women and use their sharp brains and their emotions, because a lot of decisions are emotive, to bring other women behind them. So it's not 25% at the table, it's 55% at the table, or 75% at the table. I think people have to take advantage of working part-time sometimes when you might have a large family pressure, and it is impossible to have it all. That was the slogan when we were coming along. You can have it all. You can have it all, but you'll be exhausted, and you might not perform your best at all the things. So you have to kind of delegate. You have to pay for help sometimes. You have to ask for help sometimes. But I do think women can be and are excellent leaders in the business world today. And
I wish I had time to play on what you just said, but we don't, with only 45 minutes. But the concept about asking for help when you need it is just so important. And too often, I think folks don't do that. And so they assume they can't do it, and they don't put themselves out there. And it ends up being kind of a vicious cycle.
It is.
Asking for help when you need it is a strength, not a weakness, would you say?
It absolutely is.
Yeah. All right. So I read in your bio that there are 3 things particularly that you really love: reading,
Okay.
cooking, and traveling. So, what's your number one kind of current recommended book these days for anybody listening?
So I have a great one for you.
Oh, good.
I love Malcolm Gladwell. So this is his book, The Tipping Point, which is so he studies phenomenon. Usually the blink was about how fast you make decisions. This is about how a small thing blossoms into an epidemic. So here we are in an epidemic. It's the perfect book just to read about why are certain shoes popular? Why do people, do sorts of jobs? And it's just talking about how there's enough data in the world, and all of a sudden the tipping point is everybody wants to do it, or it happens to everybody for this pandemic. It's just fascinating, his examples and real life situations that you can apply to so many things. I love his books.
I do too. I could not agree more. And one of my favorite visuals from that book is the thought about snow, which each snowflake doesn't weigh anything. I know you know where I'm going with this.
Yep.
I mean, you can hold it, you can't feel the snow. It doesn't feel heavy.
No,
but at some point, all it takes is one more snowflake for the limb to break.
Yes, exactly.
You don't know when it's going to be, what snowflake. You can't even measure it, but something changes in the wind.
Exactly.
One more thing. It's a fascinating read. I agree. All right. So you love to cook as well. What's your favorite dish or area of cooking? And what time's dinner? I'm on my way. No,
Tonight might be takeout.
Okay.
So all of us have probably been cooking a lot in COVID isolation. So I made a lot of bread this winter. We're off the bread now because we got our COVID 10 pounds to fight off. But I do love Italian food. I love pasta sauces. I've transformed from my heavy meat and pork-based sauces to more seafood and shrimp and things like that. But I love pasta and creating a nice sauce to go with it.
Here's what that tells me. When I arrive at your house for dinner tonight, it will smell great as well.
It will.
You may have fresh bread, even though that's kind of on the...
Oh, there will definitely be bread. Yes.
Okay, I can't wait. All right. So travel. Favorite place you've traveled, and was it business or personal?
So my favorite place to travel related to pasta is Italy. I was on an antibiotic project team for about 6 years. The R&D unit was in Verona, Italy, which is a little north of Florence. And I went many times a year for about 3 years to Italy. So just a fascinating country. The people are passionate about their food, about their culture, about their history. The drug development team was very passionate about their product, which did fail, unfortunately. It had an adverse event that just couldn't be overcome by redoing the molecules. So again, great lesson. They were very proud of their work to the very last day. The second place I love to travel is the Caribbean for very different things. So not so much culture and not so much history and really not such great food, but I do love tropical blue waters.
I was going to say, do you dive? Are you a scuba diver?
We snorkel, we don't scuba.
Okay, outstanding. Okay.
Great place to sit with my book on the beach, so I can multitask on that one.
There you go. I love that. That's outstanding. I can't wait for us to be able to go back freely and happily and without all the restrictions. Okay, so let's quickly transition to Salem, though we've been talking about Salem the whole time. Okay. So I'm just going to ask you just one quick word, a little rapid fire. What was your favorite course at Salem?
Genetics.
Well, all right. I love genetics too. What's your favorite Salem tradition?
So I'm not even sure they do it anymore, but it was the candle tea at Christmas.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah.
We just finished that holiday, didn't we?
Yeah.
Okay, so you needed to go someplace on campus just to think quietly, recharge, find a quiet spot, perhaps that no one could find you, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Where would that be? Where'd you like to hide and go think?
So oddly enough, I would go into the science building and go to an empty laboratory. Those beautiful, sleek black countertops were just restful and peaceful. I could spread out my notes. I could, do a little charting or writing. It just gave me a really calm that I didn't get anywhere else on campus.
Here's what I think I can guarantee, Ann, is that probably no one else will answer that question that way.
No, probably not. It was a very solitary place.
But that's cool. Whatever turns you on, it worked for you.
I spent a lot of hours in that building, as you know.
I do. And I just never forget the last day of genetics and letting the fruit flies glow in Jim Edwards'
Yes,
office. You probably did the same, right? So I'm sure it was a routine, but we thought it was our idea. You know what I
yes,
mean?
of course. Yeah.
All right. So thinking about Salem again, I love thinking about those times. I call it the secret sauce because it's just lack of a better term. There
Hmm.
was something about Salem that every time you think about it, my guess is you kind of get warm fuzzies. What was it about your time there that causes you to really think back in a very positive way? What made you feel like part of a community? Why do you care about Salem?
So to me, Salem gave you an instant sisterhood. Now I have my own sister at home, um, but just like any other sibling, you're friends with them sometimes, and a lot of times you're not. There's a lot of rivalry. There's a lot of, this is my half of the room, and your toe has gone over the line. Salem, it was this kind of neutral ground where all of a sudden there were all these interesting people from all over the country with different perspectives and different reasons for being at Salem. A lot of them were legacy. I was not. Just, why are you going to be a scientist at a liberal arts college? That was a very common question to me. Um, but it was such a good fit. There was a great range of courses. In a liberal arts college gives you great electives that you would never choose if you went to a tech school. I took an interior decorating design course. I took a clothing design course for electives. Um, it was so safe and peaceful. We both were there in the late 70s. There was a lot of uproar in my hometown in the 70s, a lot of racial violence and protests. So it was such a safe and, I don't know, just amazing place that you went to work. We studied hard. We played hard. There was always somebody in the hallway laughing and cutting up. It was just, it was a big family almost immediately to me.
It'd really be fun to pull the string too about the playing hard piece, and I'd love to know about your playing hard, but we'll let that slide for now.
Yeah, yeah.
It's funny what I've learned as I talk to my classmates, now, and as we get together and we talk, and they said, we did XYZ, and I went, you did?
Right, right.
You climbed out of the window on the third floor every other day,
Yeah,
whatever. It's like,
yeah.
no, so it would be fun one day to be able to go back and ask everybody we've interviewed those kinds of questions.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, very different interview.
Very different interview, but I love that. And yeah, you're right. That's how I felt too. Just an instant community, an
Yeah.
instant bonding of sisterhood in a safe environment with faculty that deeply cared. And I don't, not just faculty, staff, everybody that surrounded us that deeply cared about your being successful in whatever you wanted to do.
Oh, they all knew our names. I mean, you're not going to get that. I mean, I went to a big graduate school. I would bet that 2/3 of the people in my program didn't know my name. It's just a whole different environment. Yes.
Whole different environment. So, with that in mind, knowing what you now know now and reflecting on those days then, what letter would you send to your 20-year-old self? What advice might you tell a first year student at Salem about their experiences there and how to treat yourself and others and fully enjoy the experience and learn from it?
So I do think you should immerse yourself. I wasn't in student government. I didn't do sports. Not my niche or do either of those. But learn your classmates. All the majors have really small groups of people. Learn your little tribe there. Enjoy very diverse people and learn so much from them. Living in a communal setting is a whole book about how to learn to live with other people the way we did in a dormitory. But yeah, take advantage of that. Learn what you like and what you don't like, and make your way. I think that your point about the faculty, they want you to succeed. They want you to choose the best courses that are going to challenge you and shape you. So go ask for advice and help. Here's 3 I'm thinking about. What do you think I can do with any of these? Enjoy the basic classes. When we were there, everybody had to take modern dance. Everybody had to take art history. I have benefited my whole life from both of those classes. So you just don't even think about the small things that Salem offers to you until you're much older and say, wow, I recognize those paintings because I sat through all those slides when I was a freshman. As a biology major, I wouldn't have chosen that at another school, never. So,
yeah, I love the paintings actually behind you right now as I look in your
oh, thank you.
over your
They're both local artists. Yeah.
They're beautiful, and I think you must have chosen that jacket you have on to match the
Oh,
lower.
yeah.
The
Quite consciously.
color's the same. Well done. No, yeah, I hear you loud and clear. I mean, it is to take advantage fully, and in today's world, Salem offers even so much more than it did when we were
Oh,
there.
absolutely. Yeah.
Advice you talked about talking with your faculty about your future and about potential careers. We actually now have a very robust career center as an example
Right.
that helps with placements and with job thinking and with how to apply and
Internships. Yeah.
all the different things that's necessary that are there. So nice words of wisdom. And I hate to do this because I'd love to talk all day with you. This is amazing. And my guess is everybody who's heard this would love to hear more of this from you. You really are the successful woman and a wonderful role model for all of us. So I'm going to give you one last chance, though, to bring it home. The camera, whatever, the camera's yours. Last word. What would you like to leave people with?
So, two things: be generous with what you know and be generous with your time with others. And the second thing is be grateful and show that gratitude. I think we often learn something or take something from someone and we don't tell them how much we appreciate their gift to us. And it's not a monetary gift, it's their time and their attention to you. So take that time to tell them the impact they're making in your life, or that you appreciate the change they've made at your request. Circle back with people and tell them that their work's appreciated.
I promised I'd give you the last word. I'm not going to respond to that except to say thank you. I mean, I really mean that. And
I
frankly,
enjoy it today. It's fun.
kidding me, on behalf of all of us in the extended Salem community, I just can't thank you enough. You really do make us all proud. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy.
You're welcome. I mean, to all of our viewers too now, I really look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks with another episode of Salem Voices. But I don't want to transition out of this one too fast because I just think it's been an amazing, amazing 45 minutes. Thank you for sharing yourself. I'm full of gratitude for all you've given back to this world. So thank you. And Ann, would you join me? And we're going to do our little fist bump. And we're going to say Salem strong, okay? And that's how we'll end. Thanks to Ann Stokley and Salem
strong.